welcome to Circle Passages. My name is Heather, and I am here with Buck Pavoni and Pat Wald, and we are here to talk about climate problems and solutions. You will see this. I've added Buck with a little smiley face to our little caricatures. And we're here with Circle Passages. We're here with TCTV Media. As always, they are so gracious. And so any support that we can give to our community media would be great. And without further ado, we're going to get into climate. And we're, again, expanding on our Climate 101. You can see that Buck has joined Pat and myself with his little character there. And we talked about, and Pat will help us recap, what is climate and why is it so important. And we have the Jim Henson quote from NASA, "Our future depends on an understanding of our air." And I also have this adorable, these guys are my favorite, recap. And we went through, and one of the basic principles is I am Dr. Art, you're Dr. Science, and we're working together. Buck was filming it, and working together to animate and bring to life the climate crisis and what we can do about it. So with that, Pat, do you want to help us remember what it was that we talked about?
So we did an hour program, and that's can be seen at, you can find that at the Circle Passages.
Yeah.
And our original goal is that Heather and I both worked at a children's museum. And I did a lot of the tours and the education about natural history. And one of the things that I noticed is that the adults that came had sometimes not as much, and sometimes sometimes a lesser understanding of the natural world than I expected. And we found that a lot of people have been educated in how to do an experiment, but their understanding of how the planet that they live on works was missing. So we thought we would try to put together some sort of a children's museum style beginning 101 about climate, about the atmosphere. And so we began, and originally Heather and I went out to an art fair, and we tried all sorts of things like cartoon formulas, and what we found is that people, even if we made them very simple, people just did not relate to formulas or mathematical equations or anything like that. So we also, Heather made this beautiful tree to show about the photosynthesis and the cycle of the tree. And that's what we found drew people. So we learned two really good lessons, three. One was that people really didn't know much about the topic, and that included people with science backgrounds, which that was the most surprising part. And then the second was that we had to have visuals to talk with people without having a picture to look at or something that they could visualize in their mind, particularly because climate is a system. That didn't work. And that we had to make no assumptions about what people knew. So that was our three takeaways. And we decided that we would try to make a graphic communication conversation, and that people could educate themselves, but also share it with others. So that's how it began. And I wrote the script over a period of a number of years where I read endless books on climate and condensed it down to very little.
So much time in an itty-bitty package. Yeah.
And so we originally thought we were going to be spending about 3 hours to film this. I'd say this to our photographer, our cameraman. And the day came, and it was 1 hour. So we put all of that into 1 hour, and that's what you'll see when you see our Climate 101.
Yeah, and we'll reiterate where to find that at the end too. But I thought that was very fun. Again, it has these adorable cutouts, and
we really do. We go through basically how does the atmosphere work? Where does it come from?
Right.
And basically, one of the main ideas we come out of it is that the total interconnectedness on a molecular level, or even on the human level, how everything is connected in the universe. So that was a really important part. And then we go through talking about different things, like the three atmospheres that we've had. So people think it's always been like this and always will be like this. And so what we try to do is say, atmospheres and climates change. And this is the first time they've changed due to human activity, and that is why they're changing right now. And then discuss why they're changing, how much they're changing, and put it in some perspective. How long has it been since we had this much carbon in the air? And what happens when there's carbon in the air? And so that was what we did. And I think it's quite successful. And our main goal was to have something that was really a prelude to looking at the climate crisis. Today, I think we're going to come back and look at more problems and details and talk about what solutions people could find. But that was one where we felt like people could get together, watch the film, and then start talking about what they understood now about climate, and be able to have a conversation and be able to read and understand what they were reading.
Yeah, it was very much a big picture.
Yes.
And animation of it. And Buck, you filmed it, which was heroic. And any insights from your side of the camera?
Well, actually, being in the control room, I wasn't sitting out here. It was just the two of you, and it was just amazing to watch this unfold, where you were providing the basic information about here's what's taking place, more the science of it. And as you were doing that, you were doing graphics on not the whiteboard, but on these papers, well, these right here, what you showed. So it was really cool to watch the collaboration between the two of you as you're telling this story. And what I thought was great, because sometimes, science can be very fascinating. Sometimes it can be a little dry, but it was anything but dry. And again, it looked like the choreography was great between the two of you. And I guess, as we step back, it was cool with all of us being a part of that first show, which actually was seen on TC Media, Channel 22 last month. So we'll be able to pull that up again, but it's going to be maybe not with TC Media. It'll be in another format, either Circle Passages or maybe on YouTube. So it'll be available to, if somebody wants to, well, let's see what the first one was about, to be able to do that anyway.
Yeah, and we'll get the previous show, and then also Richard Gammons and
Yes, Glenn
Anderson.
Interview.
Years back, another show. So we can put those all together on Circle Passage website, and people can look at that. And hopefully we'll have some ongoing dialogue about problems and solutions. And should we dive into that?
Let's do that,
Okay.
because that's where we are today, huh?
And yes, and these are the papers, we said this last time, but graphic facilitation and graphic recording is really about illustrating something, bringing it to life, and showing people. And so a lot of the systemic systems thinking issues are really helped by this kind of overview. So this is, of course, okay, Buck is underrepresented with sorry,
Looks
Buck.
like Sasquatch there.
Yes, you do look. I put a happy face on you, so you didn't look like
Thank
Sasquatch as much.
We're doing a good environmental thing. We're reusing, repurposing.
We're repurposing, yeah. And so I actually learned the graphic recording and facilitation for systems thinking conferences that I would do this for. So my problem, and that's what we're going through first, is our problems. Mine was interacting global warming tipping points. And what you can see right away is that it's not one thing. It's a number of different issues. And so you have the melting of the ice, you have forest loss, you have ocean current change, permafrost, pandemics, but all of these different issues are impacting each other through different arrows. And so the biggest thing that I would like to have us recognize as it's a problem is that there's no single solution, there's no single issue, if this person does this, or if this company or this nation, that it's really all of us. It's a manifold problem. And it's systemic, so you have to look at like the albedo, which is white effect of, if ice melts, then instead of reflecting the light back, then it's absorbing, and so then you get these compound effects. So my big thing in terms of my problem, we're all bringing a problem to you guys, is that these really require us to sit back and to look at multiple causes, how they influence and impact each other. And then what I chose to put on the sides is systems, thinking this is my purple iceberg. But so we see the events as the top, but what I liked about this is that we have to get from the reaction to an event to looking at the patterns and the trends so we can anticipate the underlying structures. So we can think of this in terms of societal patterns and trends. What do we have to do individually, but what do we have to do collectively? So we get down to reform and then mental modes to transform. And a lot of this is about beliefs. And, so people need to self-reflect not only on what they need to change, but to really make deep and abiding or sustainable change, people need to look at their belief systems and they need to look at patterns. And so what I want people to recognize is that all of these issues have the complexity of multiple factors. And yet they can be localized or focused on. On this side, everything's connected. We all know this. Again, Pat was saying subatomic, we're breathing air that was in China 3 days ago. We know this, but it's again this recognition that everything we do impacts others, and that can be negative or it can feel like we're not empowered, but it also is empowering in that together we can make significant change and we can create a movement. So anyway, that's my idea. And I live on the Puget Sound. Pat, you live really close to the Puget Sound. Its oceans are rising twice the open ocean. The Sound is rising at that rate. And so, that's even a variable among these different impacts is, what is the impact where you live? And so people can look at the interconnected nature. And I'm going to end on this. This is supposed to be the Statue of Liberty. And people wouldn't necessarily recognize that democracy, instability in terms of governance is actually climate related, that everything, psychological well-being, mental health, all of those things are interrelated, and global warming is causal in all of these different effects.
So will the water eventually be to the knees of Statue of Liberty? Because it's rising, right?
I don't know, Buck. Right now I'm worried. I'm going to be affirmation positive that she holds her torch up. And I was just looking at the middle class has just inverted in terms of our change over the last couple of decades. So we've got multiple problems, but they're all related. And if we can address this one, it has a positive impact on all of these other aspects. So in that way, it can be simplified if we look to one thing that we can do. And we're going to move to that with our solutions. Ready? Buck, you're next, I think.
So, with what you were just describing, population, we just passed the 8 billion mark of 8 billion people on the planet, which is, just astounding. So, and kind of to put that into perspective, each one of us has some kind of impact on the environment, from things that we do, stuff that probably we don't do, but it's just awesome where somewhat in a negative sense of that impact can be negative. So it just seems like this thing is like a rocket, climate change. It's happening so exponentially, amazing takeoff here of out of control, if you would, is how do we kind of rein it in again? And we'll get back to a little later. I will mention something about solutions, but the problem really is the rate of how things are deteriorating, if you would, as far as the climate is concerned. That's just so concerning, and we know that. And like you just said, just the level of the Salish Seas, Puget
Yeah,
Sound,
okay, yes, the Salish
is,
Sea.
you know, you don't see it, but it can be measured, and hopefully it's not where we do witness it, but again, it's that growth and how things are taking off here. We need to get some kind of handle on it if we can, climate-wise anyway.
Yeah, and one of the things, when I looked up the curve, so this is about 50 years, this curve, and so, you know, the Western world has tapered off its rate of reproduction. Africa, when they look at the concentration, you know, it obviously is pretty varied in terms of where there is a high concentration of population. But the big thing I thought was important too was the impact of climate change on humanity and the impact of humanity on climate change, that we're in the Anthropocene, right, where we are creating the climate, and how many of these are systems, you know, and are the inverse, like our demand for food is supposed to go up 60% just in, if we go up to about 9.5 billion, and then our water supply is going to be 40% down, you know, so it's taking into account these different factors, I guess, is part of the complexity.
You know, they say that when agriculture began in Africa, that there was like 12,000 human beings.
Right.
And that's when they stabilized, and that's when growth began. And then you think about that with 8 billion now, and go heading towards more. But one of the things that, you know, during those early times, and that was our two characters we had there, people were able to move and flux when the ice came down or there was an area of drought, everybody pick up and move.
Mm-hmm.
But now the world doesn't allow that. So you have these people trapped in an area that they can't live, and then you bring on this whole, talk about the relationship to governance and political, you know, political issues, is that they become climate refugees. And then it's finding a place to go in a world that is so heavily populated. That's another really difficult aspect of it.
Right, and there was something like 1.5 to 2 billion poorer people on the coastal areas, because that's where a concentration is. And so, yeah, that's the tipping point, the interconnected nature is that all of this works together, and they're the most vulnerable among us. I didn't put any animals in, but I would like to have animals represented. You know, the most vulnerable are Mother Nature and the children, and, you know, the poorest among us are the most implicated, so. This is too complicated, but I just thought it was, you know, so much comes from, you know, water and food supply going down, water quality going down, all of these different rising temperatures, rising CO2 levels, rising seas, and rising extreme weather patterns. And so the consequences, we tend to think we as humans are creating this effect, but also obviously it's affecting us, which we know. And so if we can really get that it's this 1-to-1 ratio, hopefully in our own self-interest, we'll start acting more. We ready for Pat?
So I was going to do, now my problems.
Okay.
I picked two sort of kind of more like large scale, what are the problems? And so I picked, the first one was, so we've been at this for a number of years, being interested in it, and we've talked about conversations with people, and I've always, people are sort of frightened to have conversations about climate, and that was one of the reasons we did that 101. We wanted to have a real user-friendly conversation about climate. It was informational, had a lot of wow in it, just like you said, Buck. But for me, the scary one is when you talk with people and it's just not on their, it's not on their radar at all. They have not thought about it at all. And so I don't have trouble reading books about climate change, but I do have, I find it really difficult to look at when people haven't thought about it at all. So I thought about it, and then what I realized is that one of the main problems is that it's invisible. And it has remained invisible for the entire time. So if you look at the Kiehn curve, which was about 1957, and you watch this problem coming on and on and on and going up and up and up. I think it might be on that one.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. But all of this time, it's been invisible. And so we've been asking people to react to a problem that they can't see, hear, taste, or touch, you know?
Yeah.
And so he's actually hiding it here, but you can, if we take him
yeah.
off, you can see that all of this time, my entire lifetime, the amount of carbon dioxide in the air has been climbing.
Right.
It's only now that we're starting, now that it's gotten so high, that, in fact, as high as it's been since these two guys, Neanderthal and our our would be like ancient ancestor and the Neanderthal, that we were actually starting to actually see something. So now we're so heavily into the amount of carbon in the air that we are seeing things like tornadoes and wildfires and sea level rise and droughts and flooding and torrential rains and just all of these things. But the reason we're now seeing the problem is that the problem's been building invisibly for a very long time.
Right.
And I used to say, if we could just put some dye in our cars, so that when we drove down the street, they'd see a cloud of blue coming out the back. And we really have been able to just like close our eyes to it. And now it's in everyone's life. So that's a problem. So the first part of the problem, I thought, was that it was invisible for a long time. And then the second one, and both of you have talked about this one, is that it is so large that people tend to, even when Kiehn first made his measurements, one of the first things that was really surprising to them was that when they did measurements all over the world, there weren't pockets of high carbon dioxide. It was spread quite evenly. Now, we know that certain environments like the two poles react more dramatically to the rise in CO2, but the rise in CO2 is everywhere. So basically, what we're looking at is a very large-scale problem. And the best equivalent to it that I think to understand is non-point pollution. So in non-point pollution, it's not like you've got a factory somewhere, we can all drive to the factory is the problem, we fix the factory, then they stop polluting the stream, and we're all good. It's non-point pollution. It means it's in everyone's backyard. It's where every person who drives a car. It's all the background that we use, that the pollution that's caused by our source of electricity, whether it's dams or coal power or whatever. But it's everywhere in small amounts, but pervasive over a global scale. And so this is, in a way, it's part of the problem, but I'm going to segment it to, it's also in a lot of ways, we always see the solution's always in the problem. It's also part of the solution, what means that is that we three as individuals, when we go up against this problem, we're not going up against some huge thing. We're going up against our own behavior and our behavior of our neighbors and our families and our children. And so when we do make personal changes, that is the solution. So that the change all has to take place in multiple ways. And so that's our transition into solutions.
Yeah.
So,
be the change in the world you wish to see.
yes, because it's the only way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is empowering that we can do something. You know, if it was localized somewhere else that we didn't have access to, we wouldn't have agency, but we all have agency to make change. I can dive into mine. And I didn't draw any of the solutions, but I have something optimistic. We can do it, yes. So the solution, the beauty is that it comes out of each of us. So then we can reflect on who am I, what are my gifts, what are my strengths to come from in service to make a positive change or a difference. And so for me, one of the things I was looking at is I have the doctoral degree in depth psychology. So mental health, and Buck, you and I are working with youth and with different people with rites of passage. You know, how can we help? I've taught a course at a college on ecological grief and psychological suffering. So how can we look at this holistically and recognize that we also need to fortify ourselves to be agents of change? So what I'm giving as one of the solutions is I created a platform where people can see this content, and it's a place where people can go, and it has conflict transformation courses that are free. It has a community platform that's free, has a lot of different resources for people, including our Climate 101 and eco-activism and different things working with nature. And so my hope is that through that, people can link up and inspire each other, can communicate ideas to each other that give each other hope, because we need hope just like we need bread at this point, or breath. And so that's one of the ways that I'm trying to do it, and also to reach at-risk populations. So we're going to talk about the solutions that don't seem to be a direct correlate maybe, but for me, reaching at-risk youth, reaching homeless people who, in a large way, these are populations that are going to be adversely affected more than others by some of these problems. And so to help give these people some support, holistic support, and then also to introduce people and group transformation. I'm calling it a revolution and a renaissance. So, so that we can get a movement, and that can be an impetus to collective behavioral change.
And you mentioned your platform. You're talking about your website, right?
Yeah, and my learning platform, where I have a bunch of schools and things, and it's like the rites of passage are on there, and it's eco art therapy, but it has activism, because you can't not act and be well, quite honestly, in many ways. So there's the literal way, but in terms of mental health, I mean, when Pat and I started doing this and looking at it more directly, we were working with carbon sequestration a lot early on, and I realized quickly that if I'm going to look in depth at these issues, I'm going to need to do something about it. Otherwise, you won't be able to buoy yourself psychologically. You will just be weighted down. And so I think the activism, I call it uplifting eco-activism, because I do think it gives you a sense of uplift. We need to act, or else we will not feel good. I think it's really that simple. And so that's kind of my approach, is to give some platforms that people can reach from their phones too, so they're accessible. There's a sliding scale, including free. So trying to, again, be the change in the world that we need to see, and to give people a platform where they can come together and help each other with resources. Yeah.
And community is so important. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've talked about is that when you go into these and start working with them, no matter whether you get into solar panels, whatever, you meet amazing people.
Right.
Really positive and bright and creative problem solvers. They're just so fascinating. And that's uplifting to be with those people. So that's a huge part of it. You're providing a community.
Yeah. More than anything, it's a community. And I remember attending a recent conference, and that's what I thought these people are inspiring. And our news media is 10-1 negative, and now it might be 100-1. I'm not quite sure. But we need to remember that actually people are fundamentally good, that we do care and that we can do something. These are things that we really aren't served with our media as it is currently.
And it seems like it's very important to personalize what is taking place here. And you're touching on that. You're talking about it is for the individual to,
right.
Need to step up and recognize, okay, we're hearing it, we're seeing all these things that are taking place regarding climate change. We're a part of it, but to personalize it is kind of like what can I do? What can we do collectively? And like you said, really, you'll come upon some folks who they're right on it. They're doing their very best to how can we affect the impact that's going on, try to tone it down, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and it can be fun. You know, we were talking about sending the cards out for political or for, you know, environmental issues, and my dad has little parties to do it, and, you know, it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. You know, you can solicit a friend, and I put on here, I have a grandnephew who's the cutest. But so I put deep why, you know, I mean, we can fight climate change, and short version, we have to, you know, and we have these great motivations of, you know, 7 generations. Again, I didn't put any animals on there, but, you know, we have 8 billion and however many animals and plants there are reasons to do it.
And when we were finishing up the last one, we were doing we had the cartoon characters that you use, and we had the path, and we had one path leading ahead and one path going up as the climate, as the carbon rose. But when we were making it, I remember we had 2 people, and we said, wait, where are the children?
Right.
So Heather added all these children because their lives will be in the future for much longer than our lives will be in the future.
Yeah.
And so that was just that really brought home to me what this is all about, you know.
Yeah, and I actually almost put up an image. I was going to do a silhouette, but it's a mother with her hand out to the toddler. So part of it is holding hands, walking down the path was such an eloquent image, and we put a rabbit in.
Yes.
Our rabbit was our token animal.
There's your animal, yeah, exactly.
But the confrontation of, if we looked into the eyes of future generations, I think we would act differently. You know, I mean, it's that we are not confronted in that immediate way. But for me, having this grandnephew, I have 3 sons in their 20s too, it really brings it home for, you know, what is this about and the deep why. Yeah.
So I'll transition
Okay.
On that point, which was so my solution was talking about action in recognizing who you are and where your skills lie and what you do in life. And so I live on a farm, and I'm in a conservation area. And so this spring, basically my husband planted 1,000 trees, which is, you know, a very interesting thing. But he recruited the children in the neighborhood. And we were talking about them being the future, because I was saying to one of the kids, I said, so, you know, see this huge tree? You know, we planted that 40 years ago, and we won't be around with the trees you planted today, but you're going to come here and you're going to say, I planted that tree, you know, and it's going to be a huge tree. So that's a really interesting element of all of the things that we've done. I realize, just listening to you just now, is that I will pass away, but all those things will go on. So that, like my solar panels, this is one of my other things, is that when I was Dr. Science, I became really interested in photosynthesis, only to discover that basically a solar panel was basically a leaf, you know, just man's way of making a leaf, you know, and all of the orientation towards the sun and all of the different things. Now the leaf makes sugar, and then that gives sugar for everything to grow, and solar panel just makes electricity. So, but it was really interesting, and I became a little obsessed with solar panels, so I decided to just go out and find someone. So I just went around to, because I've been talking about, like, what is it like to do an action? So I thought, I don't know anything about solar panels, so I just looked up and I found some talks, and I would go and attend them. And then I found a talk by a fellow who was an ex-science teacher. Of course, I could relate to that, and he was very informative about how it all worked and, you know, everything. And so I loved him. I thought, okay, this is my guy, you know. And he came out, and it was sort of like Ghostbusters. He had this little book, and he opened it up, and he walked around like this, and it had all my trees, and it told him exactly, just a small, simple tool, told him if wherever he stood on my property, exactly how much light would fall on my solar panels for the entire year. It was truly amazing. You could watch it move around. So really interesting. So we got the solar panel, and at that time it was quite early on, and we got a lot of help with subsidies and that type of thing. So in 6 years, we had paid off the entire cost of these huge solar panels. And these are large things in my sheep pasture, because that was the best place to put them. So 6 years, And from then on, all my energy is free now. So, but it's going to way outlast me because they said it might go on for 60 more years. Well, I'm not going to live that long. So I thought, somebody will move into this house and they will have free energy for probably 40 years, you know, which is really, really kind of interesting. And then I decided I wanted to get an electric car, but I didn't have enough energy. So I went back, and so this is probably 8 years after the original one. And when we went to buy a solar panel for my car, we discovered that a solar panel half the size produced the same amount of energy, cost half, you know, no subsidies, less subsidies now, but still, even with that, without any at all, just how much we save on energy, it again will pay for itself in 6 years. So that's pretty amazing. And now I have this electric car and I plug it in, and whenever I drive, I'm driving on sunshine. I'm driving on sunshine that fell in my pasture, which is pretty nice idea. And so it's really fun because wherever I am, I get out of my car no matter where I go, and someone will come up to me and say, wow, interesting car, and I'll say, yeah, it runs on sunlight. So they look around the car looking for, how does it do that? And then I get to say, oh, I have solar panels in my backyard, and then we always get into a wonderful conversation. But one of the things that I didn't even realize is I was putting solar panels in, and then I came in and I realized, well, now my oven is a solar oven, and my dryer is a solar dryer, and my lights are solar lights. I mean, because everything, the power all comes from them. So it's pretty amazing how you make one little change and how much it impacts the. So I was trying to do as much about a carbon footprint as Germany, and I just like shot by Germany. That's really fast, you know. So it was very interesting. So what I guess I want to say is that you can have fun, you can do something very interesting, and it can be impactful in ways you didn't even expect when you began. So those were really my the ones that I've done. So now I was looking this morning because you asked me something about Christina Figueres, and I just started reading her book, and I noticed at the end of the book she had 10 things that you should do. And I noticed that I had done 9 of the 10, so I will reveal the one I hadn't done. The one I hadn't done was talk to someone who's a climate denier. And I thought, well, that one really, she's calling me to step up to this one. But one of the ones that was very interesting is that, and I find people find most difficult, is to be politically active. And so I've spent a lot of time, I had a background in working for Amnesty International on issues on torture and justice issues. So I was very good at organizing, and I did do some organizing around climate issues and did some political work. And Heather brought it up. One of the things that was really fun, and we tried very early on, we just took postcards to an art fair and watched how people filled them out and figured out what the problems were. And then we set up a program with this Indivisible group that I was a part of. And I just got an email from them. And so now we did many election cycles, but this recent election cycle, just our small group wrote over 23,000 postcards. So that means 23,000 voters were just reminded to vote, just because one day got an idea in our head to go try this out. And it was fun. We had artists illustrate our postcards and met lovely people. And so politics or any of these things that you think are going to be too difficult or not you, just give them a try, because you'll often find there's a way in which who you are and what you like to do and your skills. So I remember interviewing people, and some people, they wanted to do things with people. That was it. Send me to place. And other people was, I want to do something at home, forget the people. Just send it to me and I will do it and I'll send it back to you. So figure out what works for you, and then do something.
Yeah. And a lot of our motivation is for people to have conversations.
Yes.
And so I guess I would also say one time I was some very tragic experiment where we were supposed to talk to people of the opposite political persuasion by phone repeatedly. It was very bad. But we're a spectrum, all of us. So, start to have conversations and see where they go. And I do think we need common ground now more than ever. So you could come sideways at a climate denier, perhaps.
And, you know, my experience of phone calling, which was really interesting, is that if I asked people about their life, it became so apparent they had such different life experiences.
Right.
It was so apparent to me. You always think that the idea you have is the right idea, otherwise you wouldn't keep it, you'd throw it out. And you really make that assumption that your idea is right. But then it became so apparent that if I'd lived a different life, I would have come up with the idea that a different idea was right. And that was as valid of a right idea as my idea was. That was really helpful for me. But it's not easy.
No, but I do think, you know, in terms of the deep why, I mean, we all love our children.
Yes,
I mean,
the common ones.
Yeah, there's so much common ground. And so I don't think it has to be a minefield at this point. You know, I think we can come together, I believe that pretty easily.
Actually, it's a wonderful opportunity, I think, again, to personalize it, and looking at solutions would appeal, charge people from any age, toddler to elders, everybody in between, is to come up with 3 solutions, each person, of here's how I can impact this change that's taking place. And doing that in a family unit, let's say, to me, it's just a wonderful, because we're all involved, a way to share that. And then, like you're talking about, and hopefully what we can do is it starts there, but then taking it, let's say, kids to school, the adults to work, and start kind of spreading. So here's what we're doing at home to try to have some impact ourselves rather than being impacted, is kind of be proactive, right?
Right.
Is what can we do? So to come up with 3 solutions of here's what I can do, and you've both mentioned some things, absolutely. So if we can look at that, I think that would be so helpful, and then bring it together again in a community situation, like kind of in groups, if you would, of how kind of supporting some of this each other, of here's, like you were just talking, and I've got some friends who are interested in putting solar system together in their home. So, you know, it's that sort of thing. So you've already been there, you've already done it. Circumstances have changed, and like you said, with the subsidies, I think that's sad that I think, again, collectively, if we can, whatever it is, get some through the companies that provide the equipment and all the resources, but some type of rebate, if you would, to encourage people to do this, because you're reaping the benefits now of all the work that you've done over these past 6 to plus years, right? So it's just so wonderful. But then, okay, so that doesn't sound too bad. I can do that, you know, for the next person to do that, let's say, and then sharing that.
You know, when we built ours, 2 of our neighbors came over and basically went to the guy and said, I'll take one of those. I mean, so now we've just tripled.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting. And I had a friend who came over and said, okay, well now it's surprising when you do something that it does inspire other people to do things. She went home and found she didn't have enough light. So what she's working on now is getting her neighbors in the neighborhood to position a panel in one location in the neighborhood where there's very good access, and then they'll all sort of chip into building it, and they'll all get the rebate from the. So I thought that was, and that, you know, that's where it gets really creative and fun, and people, you know.
Yeah, and we focus a lot on the negative, but so there's been a lot of talk about jobs lost or money lost or what it'll cost. And now the studies show that we save trillions as a nation even, but as a planet because of climate costs, you know. And so all of these green energies, I think, are the wave of the future, and I think there have to be subsidies coming as well, so.
Definitely to encourage those.
Yeah.
And, you know, just to kind of back up just for a moment, and it's very obvious, but what's taking place, the catastrophes, the disasters that are just keep growing, it seems, is we think about all of the animals that are on this planet. They're not the cause of what's going on, of what we're fighting, right, with the planet itself. And it's not it's not the plants, it's not the trees, all over the planet again. It's not the oceans, so if it's not these entities that are creating this issue and these problems, obviously it turns back to us, right, people. And again, for us to really commit and cooperate if we can, how can we really impact what's being unfortunately happening to us, all of these different changes that, it was so eloquent how you did that in that first show, laying out here's what the issues are and here's where we're going. Again, the disaster that's building is the cooperation of, again, how can we really take some steps to let's get on top of this if we can. And like you said, and I kind of working with people is want to ask families, why did you have a family? I'm sure it wasn't that you want to create some collectively humans create some problem here. It's how can we all have a part of how can we work with it, and hopefully those generations will that are coming forward not be living underground. Is really to enjoy what we've had being out and about, and but again, it's we need to work together, right? Just like you're talking about.
Pat, you were saying love. It does boil down to hope and love, and it is fundamentally an ethical, moral dilemma and challenge. There are climate refugees and ghettos, and a lot of it obviously is what hemisphere of the planet you're in terms of equity, and so it is a moral issue. It's, are we humane humans, and so to that extent it's a humanitarian issue. And that's where I think, everyone can come from their strength. You can support people's mental health, people will need aid in different ways, and we need to target causal issues. There's no shortage of things to do.
Yeah, yeah, your choices are infinite.
Yeah.
And I do think, it was really kind of interesting because I did look at that whole issue of, as the people ask, well, is it hopeless, or is it hopeful, or what can we do, and of course the future is the unknown. That's why it's the future, because
Right.
we don't know what is going to happen. But I'll tell you the story that made me really relax about that whole thing is that we had my husband. Because he's been planting these trees, now when he sees someone dig up a tree, he goes over with his truck, puts it in the back of his truck, and he brings back full-size trees with little root balls on them. He plants them in the ground. So that he put one right outside our door, and I kept watering it, and the thing looked pretty dead. And it went all through the summer, totally looked dead. And I kept watering it and watering it and watering it. And so all of a sudden, it got to be fall. It was about this time of year. And we went out, my husband comes in and he says, you better go out and talk to that tree you've been watering. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I think it wants to thank you. And so I go, so what do you mean? And I walk outside, and here in the fall, right, when everybody's supposed to lose their leaves, out were popping these little maple leaves all over this one. And so we were laughing, we were saying, and he said, well, you had hope that it was going to. And that night I sat down and I thought, I honestly didn't. I thought that tree was dead. I had no hope. And I saw this picture of this man. I had seen it. I had looked. When it struck me was I'd looked up an article about Václav Havel, and it had a picture of this old man on a hill, and he's got this big tree, and he's got a little watering can. And the tree's dead, and he's watering it. And I thought, I didn't have hope. I love trees. Mm-hmm. I did that purely out of love. I would go out there and I'd think, oh, poor tree. I'd go drag the holes over there and water them. And that, for me, was a huge breakthrough. It's like with all of this, you can just simply act out of love. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to answer any questions about things. You don't have to answer any question about what you choose to do or not to do, or whether it'll work or not, or whether someone's going to come and criticize you and say it's not enough, or, you just work out of love. And that was one of the most wonderful things about writing that curriculum, was the wow that was in it. I mean, the things that we learned about, that we found out that ancient Romans knew,
Right.
which was that we're all interchanging our body parts constantly, that we are an interconnected body of parts that materialize sometimes as Heather, sometimes as Buck, and sometimes as Pat. But we're constantly exchanging all of that. And that was just a very lovely sense of community again with basically everything on earth. So sometimes I think those things are, like you're saying, the mental health aspect. And the other thing that I found really helpful about that one was we went back all the way to the Big Bang and we watched the miracles that had to happen, the stuff that had to happen to get us here. And you have to say, it's like, look, if we made it through that crazy maze to be where we are now, you know, then maybe we ought to just try to protect this, because it is just such a huge.
Yeah, and I think we look forward, you know, not enough, but the 7 generations. But I often think that it's the past, you know, like the building on the shoulders of and from the first Big Bang out. But I look at ancient cathedrals and I look at, you know, all of these magnificent accomplishments and so many moments of altruism and grace. And so it's for that too that I think, you know, we need to really dig deep to continue this out of love.
And one of the other things that you know, strikes me in that same one you were talking about, looking to the past, go forward. I was just reading last night, and I didn't realize that late 1800s they had electric cars. In 1900, but there was all electric cars until I had an older friend who told me about how excited he was when he got a job on the line, the manufacturing line of Ford, and he was going to be able to buy a car. That was the first gas cars. Up to that time, they'd all been electric, you know, and so. And you know, and then the fellow, I can't remember his name, but I think it was like, I mean, it was hundreds of years ago, and they understood that what trees did, and how our breath interacts with the breath of the tree, and how carbon moves throughout the system. So we've had sort of this wisdom all along, and now it's just time to focus in on it and turn our gaze from consumerism to maybe philosophy, you know?
The Stoics are having a comeback.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and
they are.
The beauty is that we feel better. You know, I mean, I think we all know on some fundamental level that this external quest isn't fulfilling. And when we act, you know, and we know when we're doing the right thing. You know, confusion is supposed to be when you know what to do but you don't want to. But we know when we're doing the right thing, and the beauty is it's what makes us feel good, physiologically and psychologically. Yeah. Well, we are close to the end. Any last words of wisdom from you two on inspiring quotes or last solutions?
Well, I guess, again, just if we can learn to cooperate on so many different levels for so many different things, but especially for this right here of climate change, and to commit for each one of us to commit to, okay, this is what I can do, just like you're asking, and this is what I will do. This is what I am doing, is in the now and here and now.
And I would just second that. I look at people and they have their list of priorities, and you know, just reading why people voted, what was the motivation to vote, and so it still puzzles me if this isn't your highest priority in life, having a planet to live on. I'd like to see what your priority one is. You know, I'd love to show it to me. You know, so I really think that just. Once you make that decision and you go, I think people are going to find it a lot easier. Then the information's out there, the groups to join is out there. It's all, and you don't do it all yourself. You're just throw your bid in. You're as Buck would say, you do your 3 actions. Just throw your 3 actions in there, and then you'll take risks. You'll go on and go on TV shows. You'll do all sorts of stuff, and it's fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you, you guys. I'm going to go home and go out on a limb and challenge myself with 3 3 things when I go home because it is the can and will. And I'd like to encourage everyone to go to Circle Passages. So it's www.circlepassages.com. And we will have the shows that we did, the one with Richard and Glenn as well. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being here. Please think of the 3 things that you can do yourself and join us again as this conversation continues.
Marvelous.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, the hour does go quite quickly, doesn't it?